Having a job is a necessity as we become adults. Some parts of it we hate, like the annoying commute to work or the evil boss that's always barking orders. But at the end of the day, most of us are there for one reason: to make money. But unfortunately, things don't always go as planned, and well, you end up getting fired. There are a lot of ways to get fired, no matter where you work, even if it's somewhere like on board a cruise ship. As someone that has worked on board cruise ships, I can personally tell you that the turnover rate can be pretty high, and the reasoning as to why some of these employees get canned can be, well, interesting. That's why for today's video, I want to tell you 10 ways you can be fired while working on board cruise ships. Now before we get started, I do got to put a little disclaimer out there. There are always going to be exemptions to the rules. People get fired for one reason, and then it's also that same reason why people don't get fired. There's also going to be a lot of similarities between people getting fired on board cruise ships as well as on land, which is to be somewhat expected. But now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first way you can be fired while working on board cruise ships is you being late or missing the ship. Now I know this one is pretty cut and dry, it's simple, it's basic. However, I want to explain. So while working on board the cruise ship, you have something as a crew member known as shore leave. Now this is a privilege that allows you, while you're doing your contract on board the ship, because you're there for 6 months, you're allowed to leave the cruise ship for a certain amount of time. Now, most crew members that work on board cruise ships aren't really that lucky. Typically, they get anywhere for a couple hours or maybe half the day to actually explore these ports of calls. They're not like the guests and they can get all day, every day at these cruise ship ports. So they're lucky to have it. However, this is where the bad side of it kind of kicks in. Usually you don't have these. Maybe once a week or so you're lucky to go off into these ports and have some fun. So naturally you're going to be excited. You want to have as much time there. You want to do as much as you can while you're in these ports of call, because there is no telling when you're going to be able to go back and have the time that you have in those ports of call. Which means that a lot of crew members unfortunately get carried away. Let's say you're in Bermuda and you go to the Horseshoe Beach or Pink Sand Beach, whatever you want to call it. You lose track of time because you are working with 3 measurements of time. You of course have the time on your phone, you have the ship time, which is different from the time on land or the port of call that you're in, but you also have the time that you're supposed to be heading back, which is different from the guest time, which can confuse a lot of the crew members, right? When you get off the ship as a crew member, you have the crew member time you're supposed to be back, and you have the guest time. So again, you can see where the conundrum lies, which can cause a lot of crew members to be late for the ship. Now, if you are late for the ship, of course you could be fired, or there could be that chance, if you're lucky, you'll just have your privileges revoked because you didn't get back revoked. You know what I mean there, but you can have your privileges taken away to the point to where you can't get off the ship. Now there is one exception to those rules that I've heard about. There's a good friend of mine. We were friends long before the cruise ship, back when we were working at theme parks. Her name was Crystal Kirby, and she was kind of like a wild child. Well, we'll leave it at that. Anyway, she was partying in the Miami cruise port, lost track of time, and got left by the ship as the ship headed to Nassau. That was their next port of call. Now, here's where she got lucky. She was able to quickly purchase a ticket. Thankfully, the flight wasn't that expensive to go from Miami to Nassau, and was able to meet the ship over in Nassau. Now, the only reason that she did not get fired was because she was in entertainment, and that's not the reason, so just keep up with me here, right? She was in entertainment, and thankfully, she did not have a show in that ship sailing from Miami over to Nassau. So technically, she did not miss work. She was, of course, penalized for it. She got in a lot of trouble, got her privileges taken away to get off on the ship. However, she got lucky because technically it wasn't one of those situations where it was a no call, no show. Next up, another way to get fired on board the cruise ship is through smuggling things on board the cruise ship. Now, naturally, I'm sure you guys are probably thinking about the illegal stuff. You're probably talking about, of course, the Mary Jane and the Coca-Cola. See what I did there? You hear that, YouTube? Not trying to get demonetized. But seriously, guys, aside from the illegal stuff, there are stuff on cruise ships that the crew members and at times even the guests aren't allowed to bring on. Things like animals, perishable food, and of course, alcohol. That's right. If you guys don't know, you have been on a ship, you're not allowed to take alcohol from the land back onto the ship. It's illegal, mainly because they want you to buy their stuff so they can take the money. But anyway, guys, this stuff is a very real thing. As a crew member, if you even attempt to bring something like alcohol back from the port of call onto the ship and you get get caught, let's say you're trying to sneak it and you are purposely trying to do this and intentionally doing so, you are liable to potentially get fired on board the ship. They'll put you right off and send you home in that port of call that very day, or maybe when they get back to the home port. Now, of course, with the illegal stuff too, when it comes to smuggling, yes, that stuff does happen. I've talked about it many times, and I probably will in future videos. Smuggling illegal stuff onto cruise ships do happen. People may have some type of friends with the guards on board the ship, which is rare, but it probably does happen somewhere on some cruise ship. Not going to specify which ones. Or maybe the crew members are putting the stuff in their the prison pocket. Now, also, when it comes to smuggling illegal stuff on board cruise ships, I don't really need to state the obvious, but I will anyway. Not only will you get fired if you are doing such illegal activity, but you are also, of course, and probably will be subject to jail time. So, moral of the story, if you're a crew member, just don't do it. However, piggybacking on to our third way you can get fired on board cruise ships, talking about the same subject or similar to it, you can get fired for failing a drug test. Okay, so let's be real. For some of you out there, you're probably over it. This is where you draw the line. This ugly guy with dreadlocks is making all this stuff up. It's one thing to say that people are smuggling on board the ship illegal substances, but to say that they're using this stuff on the ship? Come on, they can't get this stuff on the ship, and if they do, how are people going to use it? Well, guys, there is one old saying, and that's if there is a will, there is a way. It's very true. I promise you, this stuff is happening on board the ship. How do I know? Well, that's another story for another day. But I'm telling you, some crazy things happen on board the cruise ship that you would not expect. Now, they would have drug tests on board the ship at least once every other week or once a month. Back when I was working for NCL, we would have a giant crew party once a month. Now, this is different from us just going to the crew bar. You can do that every night unless there was a storm or there was an outbreak on board the ship. But once a month, they would have this giant party where the drinks would be free and all the crew members can go party in one of the guest areas. So they would basically close out one of the guest clubs and the crew could all go over there and have a good time. Seems like a good idea, right? It was absolutely amazing. Free drinks, who's going to turn that down? However, this is also a very wild time for a lot of the crew members. That was the time a lot of them would whip out their illegal substances, right? Now, for a lot of crew members that were kind of just on the wiser end, they felt like this was a little bit of a trap. Now, you can put on your tinfoil hat all you want, but the way all this went down to me was a little fishy because without hesitation, 9 times out of 10, whenever they would have these giant parties, usually the following day we'd be in a port of call, and that's when they would have the random drug and alcohol test. Now, they would typically call about 100 to 150 crew members, which wasn't a lot because on my ship we had about 2,000, but they randomly call about 100, 150 crew members into the crew bar and they would randomly drug and alcohol test them. So they would have them, of course, go pee in a cup, and if they came back negative, they were good to go. Of course, after that, they would then do a alcohol test too. But if, let's say, they tested positive, then obviously they were fired. Which, by the way, speaking of the alcohol test, that does lead to the fourth way you can get fired, and that is, of course, getting drunk on board the cruise ship. So this one isn't the biggest rule on the ship, however, it is without a doubt the #1 way people get fired on board cruise ships. Why? Because the alcohol limit that you're used to on land is not the same at sea. While working on board the cruise ship, 9 times out of 10, your alcohol limit is usually around 0.05, which for males is the equivalent to about 4 beers. For women, it's about 3 beers. Now, this also equates to about 2 glasses of wine, which is not a lot, obviously, for people that may be intermediate to heavy drinkers. So you get the idea. This is due to the fact that should something go down on board the cruise ship, like you turn into the sequel to Titanic, well, you can help the people out and we don't redo what happened with the Titanic. I don't think anybody wants that. But anyway, you get the idea when it comes to this situation. Now, what typically will happen is a lot of crew members, usually when we get off in the port of call, like I told you at the beginning of the video, crew members tend to get a little carried away. And let's say we're doing an overnight. Usually the crew members have to be back either way, even if we are staying in these ports to call overnight, you got to be back usually around 11 o'clock or sometimes even midnight. So a lot of the crew members will go partying in these ports to call and they come back drunk. And of course, when you go through security, they suspect that you might be drunk at all. If you stumble on the gangway, which is the stairs leading up to the ship, they're going to ask you to blow on the breathalyzer. And just like that, that is it. If you knew the amount of crew members I saw, just go ahead and leave that way. You'd be surprised. But also, when you're talking about people getting drunk, then naturally you're going to be thinking about the nightclubs on board the ship as well. So yes, there is the crew bar, but also the crew members that get access to the guest bars too, they have a little bit of hard time controlling themselves as well. So you'll see stuff like that go down too, which is unfortunate, but it definitely does happen on board the ship. Now, to be clear, this type of stuff with the security and the crew members don't happen in a harassing manner most of the time. You're not going to see the security randomly walking up to crew members left and right and asking them to blow on the breathalyzer. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, the crew members that are working security, for example, they often are pretty envious of the crew members that get so much time to just enjoy the nightclubs that the guests are enjoying. So usually they'll just kind of watch you to make sure you aren't making any mistakes. So you got to kind of tiptoe and be on your best behavior. Now, there was one time, I did do a Ship Life Story episode about this. There was a cruise director that had no self-control whatsoever. He was getting drunk all the time in the guest bars and nightclubs. Unfortunately, one night he decided to give a bunch of minors some drinks. I don't know for a fact if he knew if they were minors or not. However, security did eventually get involved. They went to the bartender first, and the bartender pointed them in the direction of the cruise director. When the cruise director got caught up, he ended up punching the bartender and ran. He really didn't have anywhere to go, so what did he do? He ran and locked himself into his cabin, thinking that for some reason the security wouldn't find him there. Or maybe he did, who knows? But anyway, they did end up finding him, and they had to break open the door in order to get to the cruise director. And then whenever they got to the next port of call, he was fired. Moral of the story, just don't get too drunk on board the ship, and yeah, of course, don't bring any illegal substances on board either if you're a crew member, or if you're a guest. The fifth way you can get fired on board cruise ships is to be late or to miss work. Now, this is obviously self-explanatory because it's literally the exact same thing on land. However, the difference is you are living where you work, and your commute to work just dropped from potentially, let's say, 30 minutes to about 5 minutes or less. Back when I was working on board the ship, it took me about 2 minutes to get to the theater where I was doing my shows. Now, this can cause problems due to the fact that it's convenient for you to just walk downstairs to go to work, or maybe just a couple feet away from where you are living or your room and your accommodations. Now, why is this a problem? Because you know how when we're getting ready to go to work or to school, wherever it is you gotta go, you're gonna hit that snooze button on the clock, right? Imagine if you are close to where you are. You're going to think about hitting that snooze, I guess, a little bit more confidently, aren't you? Let's say even if you aren't doing that, it's easy for you to just say, you know what, I got 5 minutes. I can go get a workout in, quick pump. I could go get some Oreo cheesecake. I could go do whatever I want, go grab a snack, and I'll still be on time for work. That happens all the time. People just lose track of time since they live so conveniently to work. They don't really give it that much of a primary thought, and they end up missing their shift, or they end up being extremely late. That happened to me once. I slept in, and unfortunately, I did miss one of my rehearsals. Now, thankfully, I did find out that I wasn't supposed to be at that rehearsal, but just imagine, I was shaking, all right? I was like, man, you know what? I'm about to get in a lot of trouble, but I didn't, so it worked out. Number 6, going to restricted areas on board the ship. That's right, it can get you fired very, very quickly. We've all, whether you be on land or at sea, have seen those authorized personnel only signs. It's the same for the crew members. Just because I'm a crew member or somebody else is a crew member does not mean we get free reign to go wherever we want on board the cruise ship. It's for the safety of us and the safety of everybody on board as well, obviously. So no, we cannot go to the engine room. We cannot go to the bridge or the control room. That's where the captain and the officers are navigating the ship. You can't go check out and see how big and cool the captain's quarters is. As much as I would like to do that, you're just not allowed to do it. Like I said, it's for safety purposes, of course, and that's just how it is. You go to any of those places, you are gone, no questions asked, end of story. Not much more to explain here. The 7th way you can get fired working on cruise ships is to get too sick. I know you're probably thinking I'm joking, right? Well, nope, I'm not. You really can get fired for getting too sick. Why, you might ask? Well, there are a couple reasons around this. On the cruise ship, the idea is for everybody on board as far as the crew to be as healthy as possible. When you sign up to work on board a cruise ship, you need to go get a physical, health evaluations, shots. There's a long process to getting on board the ship before you even get there, and a lot of it is for medical or health reasons. So let's say you get on board the ship and you get extremely sick. For one, there is a limited amount of doctors on board the ship. There's a limited amount of medical equipment, and the doctors members may not be able to fully help you should you contract something really bad, such as, let's say, a disease that could potentially be fatal. The idea is to get you off of that ship and get you the care that you need. Now, let's say you end up having some illness that lasts longer than a week or 2 weeks, or you're hospitalized for 6 months. Well, then obviously you won't be going back to the ship. Or let's say you find out you have some illness that you'll be dealing with for the rest of your life. Then, of course, obviously you won't be back on the ship that way either, because again, they need strong, healthy people on board the ship. This is understandable, but there also is another situation. This one kind of comes with the story. Back when I was working on board the ship, we had a GI outbreak. A lot of people got sick. We had neurovirus outbreak on our ship once before too, and we had a crew member that worked in the kitchen. He was a cook. He didn't tell anybody, but he did get sick. Unfortunately, he just kind of hid it from the entire ship, did not say a word. So he kept going to work, he was cooking, and he caused a lot of other people to get sick because he was touching the food, and like I said, he didn't tell anybody. He eventually was caught and he was fired because he put everybody in harm's way. So you see what I mean here. These are the two main reasons, and this honestly is understandable. If you guys don't agree with me, let me know in the comment section below, but I do think this is justifiable, understandable, and fair. For number 8, you are not allowed to even walk into a guest room. Now, I know this one sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? Why can't you walk into the guest rooms? I'll explain in a minute. But the only people that are technically allowed to walk into these rooms are authorized personnel, such as the room stewards, the officers, or maybe even the captain, somebody of that nature, and of course security. Anybody else, it is a one-way ticket home. Like I said, very major rule. Now, there are of course exceptions to the rules. You can get a document that you sign, the captain signs, and the person staying in that room can sign. It can be a girlfriend, boyfriend, family member, or just a friend. After you get that documentation signed, you are allowed to go in there without any question. You don't need anybody to approve it at that point in time. You get caught, you just show it to an officer. However, if you don't have that information, then you're in a lot of trouble if you get caught by anybody that works on board the ship. Now, of course, this does get tied into a story. I was on board the ship when I was working, and I was pretty drunk, all right? It was New Year's Eve, okay? So I guess I can kind of get a pass. I was with my friend Lisa Marie, and she had family on board the ship. They had some pretty nice guest rooms, and we just happened to be, like I said, pretty drunk on board the ship. Of course, I didn't get caught, and I can handle my liquor pretty well, too. But we were running around all over the ship. Next thing I know, we were in the hallway in which their cabin room was, their stateroom. So they were like, hey, Jay, just come in here for a minute. We're going to go ahead and put some makeup on, and we're going to go back out. In my mind, I kept telling myself, I shouldn't go in this room. But I did anyway. Look, we all make mistakes, all right? I was shaking the whole time I was in there. I was like, I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get fired. But thankfully, it took a little while, a couple days, right? Because I didn't end up getting fired. But those couple days, it was about 3 days or so where I was just kind of freaking out because I didn't 3 days. 3 days, and I didn't end up getting fired, but I was just kind of paranoid because I would just sit outside all day in between my work, wondering when they were going to call me in, waiting for that phone call in my room, for them to send me to the captain's office or the bridge, for them to tell me that I was fired because I went into a guest cabin. Thankfully, that didn't happen. However, there was a crew member that was a good friend of mine that worked security. He told me he saw me, but nobody else did, so I was in the clear after that. Now, of course, we can't just leave it right here, can we? We got to take it a step further. Number 9, you cannot sleep with the guest, otherwise you will get fired. Now, this is something that does happen. There were glory days, I guess back, let's say between like the 90s and before that, you were allowed to hang out with the guest, hook up, do whatever it is that you want. However, of course, in America especially, people like to sue and people like to lie about things. So, of course, this rule becomes law now. This is without a doubt the biggest rule on board the cruise ship. You are not under any circumstance allowed to sleep with the guest unless, like I said, you have authorization to be in their rooms. However, I know for a fact that crew members to this day still do it and will continue to do so. They do it by 2 ways. Yes, they can, of course, find a way to sneak into one of the guests' rooms. Maybe they won't get caught. Or they could wait till they get to one of the ports of calls or islands because there, it's an island. There are a lot of bushes around if you catch my drift. This stuff does happen, and like I said, I believe it will continue to happen. All these people that do these crew members that sleep with the guests, right or wrong, you be the judge of that. But just so you know, it does happen. But if they do break these rules, they will get fired. Alright, now since we've almost made it to the end of the episode, you guys seem to enjoy this since you stuck around so long. Why don't you do me a massive favor and hit that like button, and also subscribe, that way you get notified when I post more videos like this, because they are coming, I promise. Now, sailing into number 10, the 10th way you can get fired while working on board cruise ships is by doing Nothing. Now, I know this may seem strange to a lot of you, but yes, you can of course get fired by either going to your job and not doing your job, or just not doing anything at all, sitting in your room while you're on board the ship. But that's not what I'm talking about. What I am talking about comes with a story that honestly I don't really like to talk about too often. However, it is an experience that I unfortunately was able to witness. Well, not witness firsthand, but the victim did tell me about what exactly happened before they were fired. So there was a massage therapist from Indonesia. As most of you know that have frequently watched my channel, on board the ship, I was friends with everybody. I was very good friends with the men and women that worked in the spa as well. For some reason, we all got along really well because I guess in a way, we're still part of the hospitality industry and we understand each other. And they were a lot of fun. But anyway, getting back to the story, this girl from Indonesia was a massage therapist and she had not been working there that long. She was only there for a couple weeks. It was her first contract and she was excited for the job. Now there was a guest on board that was staying in the Haven suite. This is the most expensive suite that you can get on board the ship. It comes with a butler and all types of really cool amenities. But basically you're a pretty high ranking guest on board the ship. So they went to the spa wanting a massage. Now this is where unfortunately things went south. Now I do talk about this stuff a lot on my channel, but I can promise you this stuff does happen. Now unfortunately the guest asked for a massage. And this is from the girl's account. This is what she told me, and I have no reason to believe she was lying. I hope she wasn't. But apparently she went there and the guest wanted some extra service and she refused. Due to her refusal, the guest decided to go back to the management, back to security, and claim that she was trying to solicit, activities to him. Basically stating that, of course, with the massage for an additional fee, she can do other services as well. And apparently the guest took this as some type of an insult or harassment, so he decided to report the girl. Now, she told me and everybody else that that's not what happened. He was trying to ask her for favors and other activities, and when she refused, he just kind of pulled a 180 on her, and this is what ended up happening. She ended up getting fired. Now, here's the situation on board cruise ships, or just in the hospitality business for that matter. But on the cruise ship in particular, one thing I've noticed is that the idea that the guest come first is a very real, very big thing on board cruise ships. It's not always absolute, but it is kind of a thing on ships. If you've been on a cruise, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. This is one of those situations that I wish there had been an actual investigation, but also keep in mind too, yes, you could say that there are cameras everywhere, but just like a bathroom similar to that, there are no cameras, there's no microphones, no spying equipment in any of these spas and salons on board the ship. It's just not a thing. So this is one unfortunate situation, again, I don't like to talk about, but I do think it's kind of part of awareness, and I think people need to be aware that this stuff actually happens on board the ship. But yes, unfortunately, the girl was fired, and she was never hired on another cruise ship ever again. Now, I do hate to leave off on such a dark note, but at the end of the day, I do think it's safe to say that unfortunately, there will always be rules, and whether we think any of them are fair or unfair as far as how things work, the rules will always exist, and at the end of the day, too, there is no such thing as job security. Unless you have a YouTube channel, then you're good. Well, that depends on you, of course. You have to hit that like button and subscribe. But I'm going to leave this right here, guys. There are a ton of ways that I could have mentioned that you can get fired on board the cruise ship. Maybe I'll make a part 2. If you want to see a part 2, let me know in the comment section below. By the way, of course, most of you out there are cruisers. And if you want a more convenient way to book a cruise, make sure you check out our travel partner with our YouTube channel, Kimberly Sunset by the Seas. She's very experienced. Her company knows exactly what they're doing. They will make sure you have the best experience when booking your cruise. She'll get you whatever discount she can, and she'll make sure you just overall have a great time. The link is in the description box below if you want to check it out, and I insist that you do. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I have more coming up, and I'll see all of you very soon. Take it easy.